This is Tracey Weston Rossman coming to you on a very chilly March day from my home office. And this will be our last interview for Women's History Month, but that doesn't mean that it's not relevant for all the time. So I am so excited to introduce one of a friend of Chariot who has been a speaker at Philly Emerging Tech Conference um, many years ago, which we should definitely have you come
I would
back.
love to come back. It's one of
Um,
my favorite conferences. Yeah, for sure.
so why don't you introduce yourself and let's talk about,
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Yeah. So I'm Andrea Goulet, and I had a really interesting career path to tech. I started out as a copywriter. And so my job was to use words and like the written word to influence people. And there's a lot of technical aspects that go into that. You have to know a lot about like the style and the syntax and the structure. And then you also really have to deeply understand people. Oh, also this is my new little puppy. We just got her over the weekend, so I'm trying my best
So
to
cute.
keep her calm. Yeah. So but then a friend of mine from high school 10 years, no, actually 12 years ago now, reached out and said, I love modernizing legacy code systems and I love fixing bugs and I love paying down technical debt and I want to create a consultancy that does this. I think you're a great programmer. And I was like, I'm a programmer. He goes, yeah, you totally are. The way you think of things in terms of patterns and, copy, like you're constantly thinking about replicating things. So we went into business together and really discovered that a lot of the ways that you pay down technical debt is actually with empathy and effective communication. And this was a link that it feels incredibly serendipitous because Scott came with this real passion for fixing bugs. Like it's his favorite thing in the world to do. And so for me, actually coming into the industry with a pretty fresh eyes and fresh perspective, I hadn't I was able to kind of see the link of, wait, y'all didn't get communication and empathy training like as part of your degrees.
Nope.
And so now that has been the thing that I've been talking about is like, how can we bring more empathy, not just as I call it empathy confetti, where it's like, have empathy is amazing. And I think we see a lot of that, but like, how can we get incredibly tactical, concrete, specific, context based in terms of how do we use empathy as part of our daily development practice? And so a great example of this would be things like commit messages, right? Like when I'm going into a code base and reconstructing the rationale of like why decisions were made, commit messages are some of the best tools that we have because they're tightly coupled to the code base. You can look at who did it, when, like you get just such great information. But a lot of times the people who are who are writing it, just they don't take it seriously or they don't think about other people. They don't think about who's going to read it. A lot of times what I find is that we treat a lot of our development activities, especially when it comes to natural language and written communication, as well, it's just a check the box activity. Like no one's actually going to read this. And it's like, no, actually people do. And this has broader implications too. So I know
Right.
like if you want like observability is a real big thing now. Like we want to be able to see like what a system does. Well, if you don't get those good inputs in the beginning, you're never going to be able to assess like what an entire system does. If you're not actually thinking about not only the people who are going to be using the app, but also the people who are going to be impacted by the app. So that
Right.
the use case that I provide there is, let's say that you're writing an algorithm for mortgages, right? To help your client is a mortgage lender. And so you're writing it to basically help them decide whether or not somebody qualifies or doesn't qualify for a mortgage. Well, if we just write it just for the compiler and just like based on the math, well, we can miss out that there's some real like existing biases there. And then if we only think about, the customer, we're only thinking about the banker. We're not actually also thinking about the applicant who isn't our direct customer, but
Right.
the decision that our algorithm outputs will have an incredibly high impact. So what I've been working on over the past 5 years and speaking about a lot lately is what I call empathy-driven development. So it's similar to test-driven development, behavior-driven development. It is a framework for how you can kind of put a little bit more rigor into anchoring your decisions around other people, and the perspectives of other people, so that while you're coding, you're constantly considering this perspective. And when you go back to that perspective, it actually can change the way that you make decisions. And rather than only coding, one of the things I hear a lot is, I only code, we just need to make the compiler happy, right? And yeah, we need to make sure that the code that we create is functional. And we also need to make sure that we're coding for people as well. So, kind of taking that really technical side of empathy and employing it when I was a copywriter, and now being able to teach developers about it. And then I'm really excited too. You're actually the first people that I get to share this with on a platform. So I am writing a book. I just got a book deal with my friend Carmen Shorkey Collins, who is over at Cisco. And so she leads the employee branding team over there. And it's the same thing. It's like we have to be able to cut through some of these assumptions within our industry. We have to be able to create better products. We have to be able to work better as a team. We have to be able to increase our code quality. And to me, the line that I see that threads through all of these different things is the skillful application of empathy. So rather than just thinking, oh, empathy is a feeling, like empathy is a nice thing. No, like let's get really tactical and teach people about what empathy is, what it isn't, when it can go wrong, when we should use it. And so that's what the book will be about.
So it's interesting because you've been talking about this for for a while, and it
Yeah.
seems like the industry is catching up to what you've been talking about.
So
Where
10
soft
years ago,
skills are
yeah.
really right. So soft skills are becoming
Yeah.
more important. It's not just your ability to code. And as we're
Yeah.
seeing, a trend, it's not even a trend. This is what's happening. The business folks, like myself, have the ability to become more technologists,
Yes.
have more input and impact into how a product is put together, messaging goes out. And on the opposite side, having your developers have more information as to what they're developing for.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm preaching to the choir
100%.
right now, which is
Oh
you're going to
yeah,
have a better
100%.
product. But as a
Well,
business owner, I'll take this from a business owner, or
yeah.
a development director, somebody who has P&L responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
How are we quantifying that for them to make that decision that it's worth the investment?
Yeah, well, I think you can start looking at kind of research, right? So you've got, kind of the one that gets cited often is Google's Project Aristotle, where, the number one core competency of your, like the number one attribute of a high functioning team is psychological safety, right? And so if you want high performing teams that are working well, delivering on time, that you've got a culture where you don't have groupthink, where people feel like they can speak out and they can have their perspectives heard and respected. Well, then you need to develop psychological safety. And in order to do that, you need to teach people how to have empathy for each other, because empathy is not about let's all be the same. It's the opposite, right? It's let's all learn from each other. Empathy is about practicing understanding. And there's actually a whole bunch of different ways to do empathy. So there's cognitive empathy, which is like the very analytical way. There's emotional empathy, which is the feeling aspect of it. And kind of the way that I describe it, it's almost like a mixing board, like a DJ, where it's like you've got to be able to teach people that when you're in different situations, you need to be able to kind of tune things up and down. And I think that you're absolutely right in terms of like, so 10 years ago, here's my perspective of, kind of empathy in software. So 10 years ago, came on board, I was like, empathy needs to be a big part of Corgi Bytes' culture. And so we had worked with, I think, a branding person, and had said, I want our core values, like one of our ones that I want is act with empathy. That's really important. And this person said, well, you can't say the word empathy and software in the same sentence. No one will take you seriously. And so then I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I guess our core value will be think of us. I don't know, like think of others. But then the more I like started thinking about it, I was like, no, this is really important. And so
Right.
what I've learned is that we're starting to recognize that a lot of the assumptions that we have about empathy are actually because of the history of computer science and how there was selection bias at scale for 30 years. So there was one study that basically in 1966 said that the number one attribute of a successful programmer was that they don't like people. And then that got built into
Well, this
something.
explains a lot of our issues right now.
It does. And I think that's the thing. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the book is like, we have been telling people who are really good with computers, like you're either good with machines or you're good with people. And like, if you look all around us in terms of just the cultural messaging that you get, it's
Right.
you look like a software engineer and you don't. And you either have people skills and you're good with empathy or you're good with ideas and machines. And that isn't true. It's a myth. And it was built off of kind of flawed methodology that then got adopted widely. And it has created these conversational norms and false dichotomies that we just embrace, right?
Right.
And we can overcome that. We can absolutely overcome that. I think it's, empathy exists because you wouldn't have compiled languages if you didn't have empathy, right? Like Grace Hopper, when she was doing Flowmatic, which then, kind of turned into Fortran and then COBOL, right? It's like, humans aren't really great at coding in ones and zeros. Maybe what if we use like natural languages instead in order to code? And now you've got Python and Ruby and, C# and like the reason we have frameworks, right? That we like think about don't repeat yourself. Why don't you want to repeat yourself? It all compiles down to ones and zeros anyway, right? We're having empathy for ourselves in the future. We want it to be easy for us to work with. We want to reduce code complexity.
Right.
So to get back to your question about like what's the business value? Well, you have code that's easier to work with. You have people who are happier, and your team morale will increase, so that decreases the amount that you need to spend on hiring. You are able to solidify a better competitive advantage because you understand your customers on a deeper level. You're able to innovate faster because you are able to solve problems, and you've got teams that are effective. You have better customer service because you're more responsive, and especially if like customer service teams and developers and QA people can all work together, like we've seen this over and over and over again. Again, to me, it's like it all comes down to not just empathy as something that feels good, but something that is really well understood as the technical skill that it is, and then effectively applied. Yeah.
Well, what's so interesting is you're sitting here with your puppy,
I,
and this is empathy right now. We're sitting here
yeah.
talking about how to make better code, and we're caring for your puppy at the same time. So
Yeah.
I think that potentially what you're talking about, because of what we've been through the last year, may be better heard as well.
Yeah, well, and I think so. I mean, just this past week, there was a Business Week article that the Chief Innovation Officer of Google called empathy the skill of the future. Adobe's Digital Trends Survey cited empathy as one of their 3 guiding principles, and talked about how empathy we have to switch from authenticity to empathy in terms of how we create products. So yeah, I mean, it's been honestly really nice because when I first
Right.
started pitching at conferences, I
You're
remember like
validated.
yeah, well, it was like I saw this, and started pitching at conferences about 10 years ago. And yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, people were laughing and saying this is irrelevant. And now it's like, no, this is really important. And so I'm really glad to see the enthusiastic embrace of it. And what I
Right.
want to see more of, and where I'm hoping that I can contribute,
Right.
is that it's great to have the intent. But if you only say like, and I did this for the longest time. So the reason that I'm saying this is because I made these mistakes. Is like empathy is amazing. Like just have empathy. But if somebody hasn't been taught like what empathy is in a skillful
Right.
way, then it's like that's not actually helping the problem. That's just kind of making people feel like they don't belong and that
Right.
they're that the thing that we need isn't accessible. So
So it's
how
about
can
putting
we
into practice. So
absolutely
the idea
absolutely.
of empathy is being accepted, but now we're going to that. So the future, and I think
Hmm.
this will lead us in a couple. We should have you come back in a couple months to
Yeah.
start talking about what the practice is. You know, some
Yeah.
simple things that you can do within your team to
Hmm.
start creating empathy development, empathy driven
Yeah.
development.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, happy to. And there's just it's been so much fun to kind of dive into it. And I'm really excited that the book will be available for purchase in the summer of 2022. It'll be we signed with Pearson under Addison Wesley, so a brand that's really well known for technical books. And I'm just really eager to get this information out. I'm having such a blast writing it because it's I always find it challenging to condense all of this into like 15 minutes or even an hour long keynote. And now I'm like, I'll have 350 pages to like really geek out on some of the nitty gritty details because, yeah, I agree. I think that empathy is the skill of the future. And it is a skill. I think that's the important thing. There's a lot of things that research now. We've seen research in the past 5 years on empathy.
Right.
It's not. There's one thing called Jamil Zaki out of the Stanford um, social social neuroscience laboratory out in Stanford. Um, he coined the Roddenberry effect. So there's Star Trek: The Next Generation, and so this is an example of a cultural trope that like just we see over and over. So we assume that this is how empathy works. You have two different characters, Deanna Troy and Data, and it's like you're one or the other. You either like can't handle, your self because you're overwhelmed by the telepathic abilities that you have, and we confuse empathy with telepathy or like sympathy or pity, and it's like no, 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 it's not that. Or it's what I see a lot is people who have chosen software development as a profession identify more as data, where it's like I will never have the capacity of empathy. And they've many times I know Scott has been told this. He's like, you just don't. And he's the most empathetic person I know.
Right.
And so we're doing ourselves a disservice by putting ourselves in these binaries
Right.
of either or. And the research shows that that's not true. So, the research shows that empathy is more like language. It's something that we kind of all have when we navigate through, but it's absolutely a skill that you can hone with practice. It's not like adult height where it's like you have one, kind of you're this much empathy and there you go, sorry. So just like you can learn to code, you can learn to apply empathy to your code. It's just a different technical skill, just like you would learn about orchestration or how to use Docker or how to do object oriented programming, like there versus functional programming. It's similar to that, where it's kind of a paradigm, and it takes a little bit of like, okay, I got my brain wrapped around it. But then like you can adopt it and you become more comfortable with it the more that you use it. So that's my hope, is to really present it in a way that's incredibly applicable, and fits into the contexts. And so if people are interested, I should probably plug the website. So
And we will,
empathyintech.com is where we've just got a one pager there, but you can sign up for updates there, and it talks a little bit about the book and the project.
and we'll put that
Um,
in the notes as
that'd be
well.
awesome. Yeah, and then I also do have a really long form blog post that I can share in the notes too,
Okay, great.
that goes into some of the details of the
And we'll
framework too.
also we'll put in your talk from ETE. So
Awesome.
thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hearing more about your book. And we're also going to say goodbye to your pandemic puppy.
Yes.
So good luck over the weekend.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us. And
Yeah.
love to have you also on Ken Ripple's show.
Yeah. Happy to. Happy
All
to.
right.
So
Awesome.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.